All right, so now what I'm going to start with first is just a little bit of free form playing around with a groove and coming up with a progression, right? And then later on, in the second half of the lesson, I have sheet music here. I'm going to go through these different examples and show you some more tangible stuff. So the first half of the lesson is going to be more just kind of you getting into my brain so you could see how I think and how I create these progressions. Now, typically what happens, and I say typically in that like just about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I was at a gig in which this is what I had to do. I got called for a gig. There was a sax player, a drummer, me. I was playing a Nord, that red keyboard that I do the organ videos on. I was playing that, and there was a singer. So guess what? No bass player. So Mr. Left Hand, that's what I'm, they're expecting you to play bass. And a very interesting story, this is a real good story, is that about a month prior to that, I did another gig with this group, and I didn't know there wasn't going to be a bass player there. So I showed up with the Nord, thinking, oh yeah, I just kind of lay down in the middle here and just kind of take it easy. I don't have to worry about playing bass or anything. I could just have some fun. Sax player's there, so they'll do the melody, so I could just kind of mess around with some comping and have a good time. Well, then guess what? I show up and I find out, oh yeah, you're playing bass. Didn't you know that? So you really have to be ready for anything because you never know what might be thrown at you. It turned out the gig was actually a lot of fun. It was great, and they enjoyed it, and they asked me back to play with them. So they were happy with what it was that I did. So typically what will happen is, like last week we're on the bandstand. It's like, all right, drummer, go ahead and start a groove. Well, here's a groove. I have a groove here for us. All right. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear this groove super well or not. Let's see. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, just in case. I want to make sure it's not too loud. Right? And then, so now typically what would happen is that the drummer would start off a groove, and then I got to come up with some kind of progression, and then sax player or guitar player or whoever else kind of plays on top. Now, I'm not really worried about whether or not the sax player or the guitar player knows what chords I'm playing. That's for them to have to deal with, all right? I'll tell them what key, all right? And I try not to do stuff that's too far out, all right? So we'll start with a key. Now, a lot of times I'll start with a minor chord, okay? When I'm playing this kind of music, kind of like a funky thing, let's talk about that first and let me explain why. If I'm let's say I'm in the key of E flat, all right? If I start with a major chord, listen to how funky it sounds. So now, it's not bad. You could do the major chord, of course, but I don't like that sound of the major. I like a little bit more bite. So then I would probably go more to a minor sound. See that second in there as well, the chord voicing that I'm using? Right? Or I might do a dominant sound. Probably not this kind of dominant. Why? Well, because to my ears, this sounds a little too jazzy. All right? This sounds a little too jazzy, whereas that's a little bit more funky sounding. Or even this. So notice that a lot of times I'll play 3-note chords. Right? And I'll say that I'm playing these 3-note chords to keep the sound a little bit more open, and I actually am. Because then if I do this in a jazz realm or if I do this in a funk realm, it's going to sound okay, right? Whereas if I do this, that tension of the 13th really starts to sound a little too jazzy sometimes for some of the funk stuff, right? But again, this is completely, this is your call as a player, right? And the people that you're working with. So anyway, I would probably go to that minor, real nice sound, get the 9th in there. If I want to get a little thicker sound, I could add the 11th in there, okay? So then we just basically start. So now see what I'm doing here with the bass line? I have the bass grooves lesson 1, and I believe there's a second part to that as well, all right? So you can get some bass line ideas, but notice root, 5, flatted 7th, right? That flatted 7th up to the root. Sorry. Right? I can bring it up to Now, a lot of times students will ask me, Willie, how do I know how to make up those bass lines? One of the best things that you can do, listen to bass players. I know that sounds silly, and I'm not trying to be, flip about that, like, oh, just listen to bass players. No, it really is true. Listen to funk bass players. So pick up like Parliament Funkadelic. Listen to James Brown. Listen to like like listen to Maceo Parker stuff. There's like those 3 groups right there. That's some great stuff to get some really good bass line ideas. Also remember to think simple. You don't have to get really complicated with it. Okay, so like this. It's just using the root, the 5th, the flatted 7th, and the root of the chord, okay? So I'm using mostly chord tones. Maybe I'll go up to the flatted 3rd there. All right, now one of the things that's most difficult for me and most challenging for me when playing this style of music is playing the same thing over and over again, all right? So learn from my challenges that I have to deal with. Try and play the same thing over and over again. I tend to want to move a lot faster than I should, and I know that's a shortcoming of my playing that I actually work on. I'm really conscious about trying to like, okay, let me just kind of sit there for a little bit and not move it around. So, for instance, if I come up with like a thing, so you see how I'm just like hanging out on that E flat minor, go to the 7th to the 6th. I talk about the different chords a little bit later, so we'll hold off on that. But just hanging out on that chord, I'm not moving around all that much. All right, so just kind of hanging out. I'm just trying to get a bass line going here, and I'm really just using the 7th, the root, and the flatted 3rd. So nothing really all that, fancy going on there, okay? So the first place to start, get a drum groove going. You got the drum groove in the lesson. Come up with a chord. Let's say, is it a major? Do you want that kind of sound? Kind of like almost a Stevie Wonder kind of sound, with that major 7th in there, the 9th, right? Or do you want like a minor sound? Or do you want like a dominant sound? Or you want like that sharp 9? Right? Now, so think about the chord that you want, right? And then find a groove and stay on that groove. Just kind of like, just chill with that drum beat, just play it over and over and just keep working that, right? Now, you might hear the term percolating or bubbling. You'll hear musicians talk about that. Yeah, just like kind of like get into a nice bubble there, just like bubbling, like just let it percolate, let it simmer. You'll hear all that kind of stuff, as musicians, when we're all like, yeah, man. So that is just letting it sit. You just like, you put that drum beat on, and you're just letting the whole thing just kind of sit. You're not rushing, all right? You just, you're not trying to like, oh, let me get to the next thing. You just let it sit. So. right, so you see how I'm just like kind of like doing these little permutations, going to these different chords. Like I said, I'll talk about that later, the different chords. But moving to those different chords, trying to keep that bass line the same way. At first, I was kind of like, you know, not really in that groove, but then started to settle back into it. You'll hear like, you know, rewind it, you know, listen back to it. You could hear when I first started, oh yeah, it wasn't all that groove, and then it starts to like settle back in and kind of get a little bit deeper. You know, I didn't go on with it for a long time, you know, not to take up a bunch of time in the video, but you know, you just kind of like let it sit there, all right? So think of it like, oh, it's so hot out, and I just like don't want to move that far or fast. I just want to like just chill out, sit in the chair. Like that's the kind of like thing. It's like it's funky. It's just, you know. So that's what you want to focus on. Get into that groove. All right. You want to get into the groove. Simple bass line, work with the chords, don't move the chords around too much, just little small motion, okay? Sit with it for right now, all right? Now when I come back, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk about where you can then move away from that one chord. So what's the next chord that you go to, all right? So I'll see you in the next chapter.